there is a quiet revolution happening in gardens around the world. And most people will never hear about it. Not because it is hidden, not because it is complicated, but because everything we were taught about growing food has pointed us in the wrong direction. Think about how most people garden. They till the soil in spring. They buy seeds. They plant. They water. They weed. They harvest once. And then they do it all again the following year. Every single year. The same labor. The same cost. The same dependency on seed suppliers, on good weather at exactly the right time, on your own energy being available exactly when the garden demands it. Now imagine a different kind of garden. One where you plant something once, just once, and it feeds you for 5, 10, 20, even 40 years. A garden that does not ask you to start over every spring. A garden that deepens its roots while you sleep. That pushes through the soil before you have even thought about picking up a trowel. That rewards patience the way a fruit tree rewards patience quietly, reliably, year after year after year. That is not a fantasy. That is exactly what perennial vegetables do. And today, we are going to talk about 14 of them. 14 vegetables that grow like fruit trees. 14 plants that, once established, become permanent members of your food garden. 14 reasons to rethink everything you believe about growing your own food. If you are new here, welcome. This channel is about one thing: building real, lasting food security for yourself and your family. Not trends. Not clever hacks. Real knowledge. The kind that holds up when the grocery store shelves are thin, when prices climb beyond reason, when the world feels a little less predictable than it used to. If that matters to you, please take a moment right now to subscribe to this channel and press that like button. It costs you nothing. It tells me that this work is worth continuing. And stay with me until the end of this video, because the final section brings everything together in a way that I think will genuinely change how you look at your garden. Let us start with something that most gardening books gloss over almost completely: the true cost of annual gardening. Every year, millions of people buy seeds or seedlings. They purchase fertilizer, soil amendments, pest control. They invest hours and hours of labor preparing beds that were productive last year and somehow need to be rebuilt from scratch again. Annual gardening is, at its core, a system designed around consumption. You consume inputs every season just to receive outputs. And the moment you stop, the moment life gets busy, or money gets tight, or your back gives out for a season, the garden stops too. Compare that to how a fruit tree works. You plant an apple tree once. You give it a few years to establish. And then, for the rest of your life, that tree produces food. It does not need you to replant it. It does not need to start over. Its root system grows deeper and more complex every year, accessing water and nutrients that shallow annual plants can never reach. Its canopy expands. Its yields often increase with age. That is not just efficiency. That is a fundamentally different relationship with food production. Perennial vegetables operate on exactly the same principle. They are the vegetables that behave like fruit trees. And understanding them, truly understanding them, is one of the most powerful shifts a home food grower can make. Now, before we get into each of the 14 plants, I want to give you the framework that makes all of this make sense. Because knowing the names of 14 plants is not enough. You need to understand why perennial vegetables work the way they do. Otherwise, you might plant them, get frustrated in year 1, and give up. And that would be a genuine loss. Here is the core idea. A perennial plant is playing a long game. In its first year, it is not primarily trying to feed you. It is building infrastructure. Think of it like a new business. In year 1, a smart business does not extract maximum profit. It invests in its foundation, its systems, its capacity for future production. A perennial vegetable does the same thing underground. It is building a root system that will, in the years ahead, support yields that an annual plant could never achieve. This is crucial. Most gardeners who try perennial vegetables give up too early. They plant asparagus in spring, harvest nothing that first year as instructed, harvest only lightly in year 2, and then lose patience. They never experience what asparagus does in year 3, year 4, year 5, when an established crown pushes up thick, abundant spears before any other vegetable in the garden is even awake. That patience is the price of admission. And it is absolutely worth paying. Let us talk about the first of our 14 plants. And I want to start here because this plant is perhaps the most famous example of perennial vegetable gardening in the Western world, and also the most misunderstood. Asparagus. This plant has been cultivated for over 2,000 years. The Romans grew it. Medieval European gardeners prized it. And there is a very good reason it has endured across so many centuries and so many cultures. Once established, an asparagus bed is essentially permanent. Well-maintained asparagus crowns can produce for 25 to 30 years. Some historical accounts describe beds that fed multiple generations of the same family. Here is how to think about asparagus in your garden. Imagine planting a tree whose fruit you cannot eat for the first 2 years. That sounds frustrating. But what if I told you that tree would then produce that fruit reliably every spring for the next 3 decades with almost no additional input, is less than #0. 5 is greater than would. 2 years of patience feel more reasonable. For most people, once they frame it that way, the answer becomes yes. Plant asparagus crowns, not seeds, in a trench that is about 12 inches deep, enriched with plenty of compost. Fan the roots out gently, cover partially, and fill in as the season progresses. In year 1, let the feathery ferns grow undisturbed. They are feeding the crown below. In year 2, harvest only a few spears early in the season, then let the plant fern out again. In year 3, harvest for 2 weeks. By year 4 and 5, a full 6 to 8 week harvest window will give you more asparagus than most families can eat from the same crowns you planted once and never replanted. Stay with me, because the next plant is one that most people walk past in a garden and have absolutely no idea they are looking at food. Globe artichoke. If asparagus is the quiet, dignified aristocrat of the perennial vegetable garden, the globe artichoke is its theatrical, dramatic neighbor. These plants grow large, genuinely large, sometimes 6 feet across and 5 feet tall. Their silvery green leaves are architectural and beautiful. And at the top of their towering stems, they produce those remarkable, layered flower buds that, when harvested at the right moment, are among the most flavorful vegetables you will ever eat. When left to open, they become stunning purple-blue flowers that pollinators absolutely adore. Artichokes are perennial in climates that do not experience severe, prolonged frost. In zones 7 and above, they will return reliably every year from their root crown. In colder zones, they can be heavily mulched in autumn to protect the crown through winter. Some gardeners in colder regions treat them as annuals, but with protection, many are surprised to find them returning in spring. A single artichoke plant, once established, will produce multiple large buds per season and will expand its root clumps steadily each year. You can divide mature clumps every 3 to 4 years to propagate new plants, essentially giving yourself free artichoke plants forever. This is the kind of food system that rewards the patient gardener exponentially. Now, most people never realize this about the next plant. They have grown it. They have eaten it. But they have never grown the perennial form, and that changes everything. Kale. Yes, kale. The kale most people grow is biennial. It completes its life cycle in 2 years and then goes to seed. But there are specific varieties of kale, sometimes called tree kale or walking stick kale, that are genuinely perennial. These varieties can live for 5, 7, even 10 or more years. They grow into substantial shrub-like plants with a woody stem that hardens over time and new growth continuously emerging from the top and along the sides. Tree kale is extraordinarily productive. Because the plant has had years to develop its root system, it produces far more leaf material per season than any annual kale variety. It also tends to be more disease-resistant, more drought-tolerant, and more capable of pushing through cold spells that would devastate young annual plants. The flavor deepens with age. Older tree kale often has a more complex, slightly nutty quality that younger plants simply do not possess. To propagate perennial kale, take stem cuttings. Simply cut a healthy side shoot, strip the lower leaves, and push it into moist compost. It will root readily. Once established, treat it like a small fruit bush. Prune it to shape, harvest the young leaves regularly to encourage new growth, and mulch the base each autumn. In return, it will feed you for years. This next plant is one of the most underappreciated vegetables in the perennial garden. Mention it to most people, and you will get a blank stare. But among serious perennial gardeners, it holds a place of genuine reverence. Sorrel. French sorrel, specifically. This low-growing, leafy perennial produces broad, arrow-shaped leaves with a distinctive, sharp, lemony flavor that no other vegetable quite replicates. That flavor comes from oxalic acid, which gives the leaves their characteristic tang, the same brightness you might recognize from rhubarb or wood sorrel. In cooking, sorrel behaves like a cross between a green and a seasoning. It wilts almost instantly in heat, transforming into a silky, intensely flavored sauce base that pairs beautifully with fish, eggs, soups, and cream-based dishes. Here is why sorrel belongs in your perennial garden without question. It is almost indestructible. Plant it once in a reasonably sunny spot, and it will return every spring, often as one of the very first edible things in the garden, pushing up new growth when the soil is barely warm. It tolerates partial shade, handles drought reasonably well once established, and requires almost no maintenance beyond cutting it back if it begins to flower, which redirects the plant's energy back into leaf production. A single clump of sorrel will expand gently over the years and can be divided periodically to create new plants. In a world where early season food security matters, sorrel's ability to produce edible leaves before almost any other garden vegetable is a genuinely practical advantage. The next plant on our list is one that behaves so differently from typical garden vegetables that the first time most people encounter it, they almost do not believe it is real. The Egyptian walking onion, also known as the tree onion or the topset onion. This extraordinary plant earned its unusual name from a remarkable behavior. Instead of producing seeds at the top of its stalks, it produces small bulblets, miniature onions, clustered at the tips of its hollow stems. As these topsets grow and become heavy, the stem bends under their weight, and the topsets touch the ground, where they take root and begin a new plant. The onion literally walks across the garden, planting itself, season after season. From a food security standpoint, this plant is remarkable. It requires zero replanting. it multiplies indefinitely. Every part of it is edible, the green tops like scallions, the topset bulblets like small pearl onions, and the base bulbs like shallots. It is cold hardy to an extraordinary degree, surviving winters that would kill most alliums without any protection at all. And it emerges in very early spring again, one of the first edibles available after a long winter. If you planted walking onions in a corner of your garden and left them entirely alone, they would continue spreading, producing, and returning, year after year, with absolutely no human assistance. That is not an exaggeration. It is simply what they do. For a food system designed around genuine long-term independence, few plants deliver as reliably as this one. Now let us talk about a plant that most people associate with flavor rather than food security, but which, once you understand its full potential, earns a permanent spot in any serious perennial garden. Horseradish. Plant horseradish once and you will have it forever. That statement is not hyperbole, it is a warning and a promise simultaneously. Horseradish is perennial in the truest sense. Its roots go deep and wide. Even if you dig out the entire visible root mass, any small fragment left in the soil will regrow. It is, in the gentlest possible sense, unstoppable. This is why the first piece of advice about horseradish is always, choose its location thoughtfully. Give it a dedicated bed, or a large container, or a corner of the garden where you do not mind it claiming territory. Once you accept its enthusiastic nature, horseradish becomes one of the most effortless and rewarding plants you will ever grow. The root is, of course, the primary harvest, that pungent, intensely flavored white root that, when freshly grated, produces a heat and brightness that the jarred supermarket version cannot even approximate. But the leaves are also edible. Particularly when young, they can be used as wrapping for fermented foods, as a bold salad green, or as a traditional component of certain European preserving recipes. Harvest the roots in autumn, when the plant's energy has retreated underground and the flavor is at its peak. Leave some root in the ground, and the plant will return without any help from you whatsoever. This is important. The next plant is one that divides opinion more sharply than almost any other in this list. Some gardeners swear by it. Others warn against it as if it were dangerous. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in between, and it is entirely in your favor if you approach it with the right mindset. Jerusalem artichoke, also called sunchoke. This plant is native to North America and was a staple food of many indigenous peoples long before European colonization. It is a member of the sunflower family, and like the walking onion, it is almost aggressively productive. Plant a single tuber in spring, and you will harvest a bucketful in autumn. Leave any tubers in the ground, which you inevitably will, because finding every last one is essentially impossible, and the patch will return the following year, often larger and more vigorous than before. Jerusalem artichokes grow tall, sometimes 8 to 10 feet, with cheerful, yellow, sunflower-like blooms in late summer that are genuinely beautiful. The tubers are nutty, slightly sweet, and enormously nutritious, rich in inulin, a prebiotic fiber that feeds beneficial gut bacteria. They can be roasted, sautéed, made into soups, sliced raw into salads, or fermented. They store reasonably well in the ground through winter, meaning you can harvest them fresh from the soil even in cold months. The caution I mentioned earlier relates to the same inulin that makes them so nutritious for some digestive systems, particularly unaccustomed ones. Consuming large quantities can cause significant discomfort. The solution is simple. Start with small portions, cook them thoroughly, and allow your digestive system to adapt gradually. Once adapted, most people eat them without issue. And in a food security context, a plant that produces this prolifically requires zero replanting and thrives in almost any soil condition is genuinely extraordinary. Now I want to introduce you to a plant that was once a beloved staple of cottage gardens across Britain and Northern Europe, and has now been almost entirely forgotten. Its disappearance from modern gardens is one of the quiet tragedies of industrial food culture. Its rediscovery could be one of the quiet triumphs of the self-sufficient gardener. Good King Henry. The name alone tells you something about how long this plant has been part of human food culture. It is a perennial relative of spinach and quinoa, native to Central and Southern Europe, and cultivated in cottage gardens for centuries. It fell out of fashion in the 20th century simply because it could not be mass-produced and mechanically harvested, which tells you more about the priorities of industrial food production than it does about the plant's value. Good King Henry produces arrow-shaped leaves in early spring again, one of the earliest edibles in the garden that can be used exactly like spinach. The young shoots that emerge in early spring can be blanched and eaten like asparagus. The flower spikes, when young, can be cooked like broccoli. In other words, this single perennial plant provides multiple types of vegetable harvest from the same root system. It thrives in partial shade, tolerates poor soils, and asks very little of the gardener. Plant it once, and it will return for decades. Most people never realize that the next plant on our list has been used as food for centuries because in most modern contexts, it appears only as an ornamental. Lovage. This is an enormous architectural perennial herb vegetable that can reach 6 feet in height by midsummer. Its hollow stems, deeply cut leaves, and yellow flower umbels give it the look of a wild, dramatic cousin of celery, which is essentially what it is. Every part of lovage is edible, and every part tastes intensely of celery, with a depth and complexity that fresh shop-bought celery rarely achieves. The leaves can be used in soups, stews, salads, and sauces. The hollow stems can be used as natural drinking straws in savory drinks, a tradition with a long history in Northern Europe. The seeds, which appear in abundance after flowering, are a powerful culinary spice like concentrated celery seed. The roots, when young, can be cooked as a vegetable or used to flavor stocks. A single lovage plant, grown in a sunny or partially shaded spot with good moisture, will grow larger and more productive every year. By its 3rd or 4th year, one plant can provide more lovage material than most families could use in an entire season. It can be divided in spring to create additional plants. And once established, it is virtually impossible to kill it will return from its deep rootstock even after the harshest winters. Now the next plant requires a moment of introduction, because outside of coastal Britain and certain parts of Scandinavia, very few people have heard of it at all. And that is a genuine shame, because this is one of the most remarkable and beautiful perennial vegetables in existence. Sea kale, Crambe maritima, to give it its Latin name. Sea kale grows wild on the shingle beaches and sea cliffs of coastal Europe. It has adapted to some of the most demanding growing conditions imaginable: poor, free-draining soil, salt spray, intense sun, strong winds, irregular rainfall. And yet, it produces magnificent, deeply lobed, blue-green leaves and clouds of small white flowers that smell of honey. Sea kale was a prized delicacy in Georgian and Victorian England. Gardeners would force it in spring by placing a large pot or bucket over the emerging crown in early spring, excluding light, and causing the young shoots to blanch to grow pale, tender, and sweet. These blanched shoots, which taste somewhat like a cross between asparagus and cauliflower with a nutty sweetness, were considered a luxury. They can be steamed, roasted, or eaten raw. If you can source sea kale crowns or seeds, and they are available from specialist nurseries, plant them in the sunniest, most free-draining spot in your garden. Give them 2 years to establish without harvesting. Then, in year 3, begin forcing them each spring for a brief but genuinely extraordinary harvest. A well-established sea kale plant will continue producing for 20 years or more. It is, in every sense, a gift to future generations. Stay with me. We are now into the second half of our 14 plants, and I want to pause for just a moment to reflect on what we are really talking about here. Because this is not just a list of plants. This is a different philosophy of growing food. Every annual vegetable garden is built on a cycle of expenditure and renewal. Every perennial vegetable garden is built on a cycle of investment and return. The difference between those two approaches, compounded over 10 or 20 years, is profound. Think about what a perennial vegetable garden represents. It represents food that becomes easier and cheaper to produce with every passing year. It represents a garden that becomes more resilient, not less, as it ages. It represents a relationship with land and plants that deepens and matures the way any good relationship does over time. And in a world where food prices are increasingly unpredictable, where supply chains have proven more fragile than most of us imagined, where the cost and availability of basic inputs, seeds, fertilizer, water fluctuate in ways that are beyond any individual gardener's control, this philosophy is not just pleasant. It is genuinely protective. If this resonates with you, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone who you think needs to hear it. Growing food well is a skill that belongs to everyone, and the more people who understand these principles, the more resilient our communities become. Let us continue. The next plant is one that looks deceptively ordinary when young, but transforms, over the years, into something genuinely impressive. Rhubarb. Yes, we typically think of rhubarb as a fruit, or rather, we use it the way we use fruit, in desserts, and jams, and crumbles. But botanically, rhubarb is a vegetable, and culinarily, it belongs in the perennial food garden without question. Its tart, intensely flavored stalks are one of the earliest harvests of the year. And a well-established rhubarb crown is one of the most productive, low-maintenance plants in the entire garden. Rhubarb crowns, planted in deeply prepared soil enriched with plenty of compost, establish quickly and begin producing harvestable stalks by their second year. By year 3 and 4, a single crown will provide more rhubarb than most families can use fresh and plenty to preserve, freeze, ferment, or share. Rhubarb crowns can live for 20 years or more. They can be divided every 4 to 5 years to create new plants. They are cold-hardy, pest-resistant, and extraordinarily unfussy once established. One word of caution that belongs in every responsible discussion of rhubarb: the leaves are toxic and must never be eaten. Only the stalks are edible. This is important to know, particularly if you are growing food with children around. The stalks, however, are perfectly safe and enormously useful, and the combination of productivity, longevity, early harvest, and near-zero maintenance makes rhubarb an essential component of any serious perennial garden. The next plant is one that modern cuisine has largely reduced to a single, rather undistinguished role, but which in the perennial garden reveals a surprising complexity and versatility. Chicory. Specifically, the perennial chicory varieties, rather than the annual types grown for salad leaves. Perennial chicory, including varieties known as radicchio, Belgian endive, and common blue chicory, produces a deep taproot that overwinters reliably and sends up new growth each spring. The roots themselves are one of the plant's most valuable products. Roasted and ground, they produce a coffee substitute with a bitter, roasted flavor that has been used for centuries as a coffee extender or replacement, particularly during times of economic hardship or conflict when real coffee was unavailable. The leaves, young and fresh in spring, more bitter as they mature, can be blanched by earthing up or excluding light, which reduces bitterness and produces the creamy, tender chicons that are used in classic Belgian cuisine. The flower stalks are edible when young, and the brilliant blue flowers, which open in the morning and close by afternoon, are among the most striking wildflower-like blooms in the food garden. Chicory is tough. It tolerates heavy clay soils, dry conditions, and minimal feeding. Once established, it requires almost nothing from you. And for a gardener interested in genuine self-sufficiency, not just in vegetables, but in beverages, in bitter digestive herbs, in plants that serve multiple purposes, chicory deserves serious consideration. This is crucial. The next plant is one that fills a gap in the perennial garden that almost nothing else can fill. That gap is, what do you grow in shade? Most food gardens are designed around sun. Full sun, ideally. 6 to 8 hours minimum. And for most vegetables, that is correct. But very few gardens are entirely sunny. There are corners, there are north-facing patches, there are areas under established trees or beside hedges. Most gardeners give up on these spots. But one plant turns these seemingly useless areas into productive perennial food space. Scorzonera. This remarkable root vegetable, a close relative of salsify, produces long, black-skinned roots with a white interior that has a delicate, slightly oyster-like flavor when cooked. It is grown for 2 years to produce roots of edible size, but here is what makes it genuinely perennial in the most interesting way. If you allow it to flower and set seed in its second year, it will self-sow reliably, creating a self-sustaining patch that renews itself year after year without any replanting. The young flower stalks and buds are also edible and delicious, like a mild, sweet asparagus substitute. Scorzonera tolerates partial shade better than most root vegetables. It prefers deep, loose soil but adapts to less than ideal conditions with reasonable grace. And its unusual flavor profile, subtle, slightly mineral, deeply satisfying, brings something to the kitchen garden that few other roots offer. It is, in the truest sense, a plant that rewards the curious and patient gardener. Now, before we reach our final 2 plants, I want to share something that I think about often when I work in the garden. There is a concept in ecology called succession. It describes the process by which natural landscapes evolve over time toward greater complexity, stability, and productivity. A bare patch of ground does not stay bare for long. Pioneering plants move in. Then, taller plants. Then, shrubs. Then, trees. And as each layer establishes, the system as a whole becomes more resilient, more capable of supporting life, more self-regulating, less dependent on external inputs. A garden built around perennial vegetables is moving in the direction of that kind of stability. It is a garden that is trying to become an ecosystem, not just a production facility. And there is something profoundly right about that, both ecologically and philosophically. We were not designed to fight our environment constantly. We were designed to work with it, to observe it, to guide it gently in directions that serve us. Perennial vegetable gardening is one of the most practical expressions of that wisdom I know of. Let us come to our 13th plant, and this one is, in many ways, the quiet workhorse of the perennial vegetable garden. Reliable to the point of being almost boring, productive to the point of embarrassment, and thoroughly undervalued as a result. Perpetual spinach, also known as perpetual beet, or cut and come again Swiss chard. Technically a biennial, completing its full life cycle in 2 years, perpetual spinach behaves in the garden as a reliable perennial through a combination of self-sowing and staggered growth cycles. That means, once established in a patch, it is simply always there. You harvest from it continuously. It self-seeds. New plants replace old ones naturally. The result is a perpetually productive patch that requires virtually no management. Perpetual spinach is cold-hardy, well below freezing, productive in partial shade, tolerant of poor soils, and resistant to bolting, the tendency of true spinach to rush to flower and seed in warm weather, ending its productive period abruptly. Unlike true spinach, perpetual spinach continues producing throughout summer, autumn, and often into winter. The leaves are rich in iron, calcium, and vitamins. They can be used exactly like spinach in salads when young, wilted, or cooked when mature. The stems of older leaves can be used like Swiss chard. In terms of raw value delivered per square foot per year with minimum effort, perpetual spinach may be the single most efficient plant on this entire list. If you grow nothing else from these 14 plants, grow this one. It will not disappoint you. And now, our 14th plant. I have saved this one for last, deliberately, because I think it represents something important not just as food, but as a symbol of the philosophy we have been discussing throughout this entire video. Ostrich fern. Specifically, the young unfurled fronds called fiddleheads that emerge in spring. Fiddleheads have been eaten by indigenous peoples across North America and Asia for thousands of years. They represent one of the most ancient and enduring wild food traditions in human history. And while ostrich ferns are not typically found in vegetable gardens, they are eminently growable in moist, shaded areas, beside ponds or streams, in boggy corners, where almost nothing else will produce food. Fiddleheads have a flavor that is often described as a combination of asparagus, spinach, and artichoke green, slightly grassy with a pleasant bitterness. They must be cooked before eating, a brief boil or steam to deactivate naturally occurring compounds that cause digestive upset when consumed raw in quantity. But properly prepared, they are genuinely delicious and deeply nutritious. What makes ostrich fern the perfect 14th plant is what it represents. It grows in the spaces most gardeners abandon. It requires no cultivation, no fertilizer, no irrigation beyond what nature provides. It returns every spring without fail, unfurling those magnificent spiraling fronds, one of the most recognizable symbols of renewal and resilience in the natural world. Plant a clump of ostrich fern in a moist, shady corner, and you will have fiddleheads every spring, reliably, for the rest of your life. That is a gift worth giving yourself. Now I want to bring everything together. Because we have talked about 14 plants, and I do not want you to leave this video thinking about 14 separate items on a list. I want you to leave thinking about a system. Imagine your garden 5 years from now, if you planted even half of these 14 plants this season. In very early spring, before anything else is stirring, your walking onions are already producing green tops. Your sorrel is pushing up its bright, lemony leaves. Your good King Henry is beginning to emerge. Your rhubarb crowns are swelling, preparing to send up their enormous stalks. Your asparagus crowns, now fully established, are beginning to push their first spears through the cold soil. A few weeks later, your forced sea kale shoots are ready for their brief, extraordinary harvest. Your fiddleheads are unfurling in the shaded corner. Your lovage is growing rapidly, almost visibly, in its designated spot. Your tree kale is providing steady leaves for salads and cooking. Your perpetual spinach patch is producing abundantly. By early summer, your Jerusalem artichokes are 6 feet tall and climbing. Your globe artichokes are forming their magnificent buds. Your horseradish is leafing out vigorously in its dedicated bed. Your chicory is producing edible leaves and preparing for its autumn root harvest. Your Scorzonera is building its roots quietly underground. In autumn, you harvest your Jerusalem artichoke tubers, a bucketful. Your horseradish roots, fresh, potent, extraordinary. Your chicory roots for roasting. Your Scorzonera, if in its second year. Your rhubarb patch is putting the last of the season's energy back into its crown, building reserves for the spring ahead. And then winter comes. And your perennial garden rests, but it does not die. Underground, everything is waiting. Roots deepening. Crowns rebuilding. The quiet accumulation of future abundance, happening in the dark soil, invisible, patient, certain. None of this required you to buy seeds this year. None of it required you to replant. None of it required intensive soil preparation. You did not need to fight the calendar. You did not need to race to get transplants in before the last frost. Your garden simply continued deeper, more productive, more resilient than the year before. That is the compound interest of perennial growing. That is why these 14 plants matter. I want to speak to you directly for a moment before we close. We live in a time when food security, real food security, not the assumption of it, is becoming something that thoughtful people are beginning to take seriously. The last few years have shown many of us, in concrete and sometimes uncomfortable ways, that the systems we depend on are more fragile than we thought. Supply chains can break. Prices can climb faster than incomes. Weather events can disrupt harvests on a scale that affects entire nations. And the more our food system is centralized, industrialized, and dependent on long, complex supply chains, the more vulnerable we all become when any part of that system fails. I am not saying this to frighten you. I am saying it because the response to this reality is genuinely empowering, and it is available to almost everyone who has access to even a small patch of ground. When you plant asparagus crowns this spring, you are making a decision that will feed you in ways that money cannot always guarantee. When you put a Jerusalem artichoke tuber in the ground, you are beginning a relationship with a plant that will outlast almost any other investment you make in your garden. When you find a corner for sorrel, for lovage, for tree kale, for walking onions, you are building something. Something that cannot be taken from you by rising prices, or supply chain disruptions, or the unpredictability of the modern world. You are building a food system that is yours. Entirely, permanently, irreversibly yours. There is an old saying among experienced gardeners that I think captures this beautifully. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. The same is true for perennial vegetables. Every year you wait is a year you miss the compound growth, the deepening roots, the expanding harvests. The gardener who planted asparagus 5 years ago is already harvesting abundantly from beds that cost almost nothing to maintain. The gardener who plants asparagus this year will be in that same position in 5 years. But 5 years from now, food prices will almost certainly be higher, supply chains will almost certainly be no more reliable, and the personal value of having a productive, established perennial garden will almost certainly be greater than it is today. The plants are patient. They will wait. But time is a resource that cannot be recovered. The year you do not plant is the year you cannot get back. So, here is what I want you to do. Not in some abstract future. Not when conditions are perfect. Now. Choose 2 or 3 plants from this list that feel right for your situation, your climate, your space, your kitchen habits. Start there. You do not need all 14 this season. You do not need a large garden. You do not need to transform your entire growing space overnight. Is less than #0. 5# is greater than. Just begin. Plant something that will be here next year and the year after that. something that will outlast the seed catalog you bought it from. Something that makes your food situation a little more permanent, a little more yours. Start with what calls to you. If you have a shaded corner, plant fiddlehead ferns and sorrel. If you have a sunny bed with good depth, start asparagus crowns. If you have nothing but a container on a balcony, walking onions will grow contentedly in a deep pot and provide fresh onion greens all season. There is a perennial solution for almost every growing situation. The question is not whether you can do it. The question is simply whether you will. Before I close, let me leave you with one final thought. There is something that happens to a person who grows perennial food. Something quiet and important. It is not just that they have more food, or better food, or cheaper food, though all of those things are true. It is that their relationship with the land changes. They begin to think in longer time frames. They begin to make decisions not just for this season, but for next season, and the season after that, and the decade ahead. They develop what I can only describe as a long-term orientation, a habit of planting for the future, of investing in things that compound over time, of choosing patience over immediacy, when patience will pay better dividends. That orientation does not stay in the garden. It tends to spread into other areas of life, into how you think about finances, about health, about community, about the kind of future you are building for yourself and for the people you love. There is a reason that cultures with deep traditions of perennial growing tend to be cultures with strong senses of rootedness, continuity, and long-term thinking. The garden teaches what the world around us often discourages. When you plant a perennial vegetable, you are not just growing food. You are practicing patience. You are building permanence. You are making a quiet, dignified statement that you are here for the long term. That you intend to be fed by your own land, by your own hands, for as long as that land is yours to tend. That is not a small thing. In the world we are living in, that is an act of real courage. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Genuinely, if you made it to the end of this video, it tells me something important about you. It tells me that you take this seriously. That you are thinking beyond this week, beyond this season, towards something more lasting. I find that deeply encouraging, and I am grateful to be making this content for viewers like you. If this video gave you something valuable, please share it with someone who could use it. A neighbor, a family member, a friend who has been talking about starting a garden. This kind of knowledge multiplies when it moves between people. And right now, it needs to move. Subscribe to this channel if you have not already. We go deep on all of these topics: growing food, preserving food, building long-term food security with practical, real-world knowledge that you can actually use. New videos go up regularly, and every one of them is built around the same principle: real information, clearly explained, in service of your genuine independence. And leave a comment below. Tell me which of these 14 plants you already grow. Tell me which one you are planning to plant this season. Tell me what your biggest challenge is with perennial growing: soil, climate, space, time. I read every comment, and I use them to decide what videos to make next. Your questions and experiences help shape this channel, and they help other viewers who are facing the same situations you are. The soil is ready. The season is coming. The choice is yours. Plant once. Harvest forever.